Let me tell you something that took me years to understand, and I mean years. Not weeks of reading books, not a weekend seminar, not some motivational quote I saw on Instagram. Years of real experience. Years of getting it wrong. Years of slowly, painfully, beautifully getting it a little more right. Sales is not what you think it is. I know, you've heard that before. Everyone says it. Sales isn't about pushing products. Sales is about relationships. Sales is about solving problems. Yeah, we've all heard the talking points, but here's what nobody tells you. Nobody tells you that sales is actually the single most honest mirror you will ever stand in front of. Nobody tells you that learning to sell is really learning to be a complete human being. And nobody tells you that if you do it right, truly right, it never ends. It becomes a practice, like meditation, like martial arts. Like learning a language, it becomes something you do every single day for the rest of your life, not because you have to, but because it's the vehicle through which you grow. That's what I want to talk about today, not sales tactics. Not closing techniques, not some hack that'll get you an extra 3% conversion rate. I want to talk about sales as a lifelong practice, a discipline, a way of being in the world that if you commit to it, will transform not just your income but your character, your relationships, and your understanding of what it means to create value for other people. Let me start with a story. A few years ago, I was sitting across from a potential client. This was a deal I wanted badly. I'd prepared for it. I'd researched the company. I'd rehearsed my pitch. I had my slides, my talking points, my objection handlers all lined up like soldiers ready for battle. And the meeting started well. I was confident. I was articulate. I was hitting all my points. And about 15 minutes in, the person across from me, this VP of operations at a mid-sized company, she leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and said something I will never forget. She said, "You know, Jay, everything you're saying sounds great, but I get the feeling you're performing for me, and I don't want a performance. I want to know if you actually understand what keeps me up at night." And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about sales collapsed. Not because she was being harsh. She wasn't. She was being honest. And her honesty exposed something I had been hiding from myself for a long time. I was so focused on what I wanted to say, on how I wanted to be perceived, on the outcome I was chasing, that I had completely forgotten the most fundamental truth of human connection. It's not about you. Now, that sounds simple. And it is simple, but simple and easy are very different things. Understanding that sales is not about you is simple. Living that truth, breathing it, embodying it in every conversation, every email, every follow-up, every moment of silence when you're sitting with a client who hasn't made up their mind yet, that is the work of a lifetime. And that's exactly my point. Sales is a lifelong practice, not because it takes a lifetime to learn the mechanics. You can learn the mechanics in a few months. It's a lifelong practice because the person you need to become in order to sell with integrity, with depth, with genuine care for the people you serve, that person is never finished becoming. You are always growing into that person. You are always falling short and getting back up. You are always discovering new layers of your own ego, your own fear, your own need for approval, and learning to set them aside so you can truly show up for someone else. Let me tell you what happened after that meeting. I didn't get the deal, not that day. I went home and I sat with what she'd said. And instead of defending myself, instead of telling myself she was wrong or she didn't understand my value, I let her words land. I let them bruise me a little. And then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I asked myself a really uncomfortable question. Am I actually good at this? Or am I just good at pretending to be good at this? And the answer, honestly, was somewhere in between. I had real knowledge. I had real skills. I had real experience. But I had been using all of that as armor, as a shield between me and the vulnerability of actually connecting with another human being. I was performing competence instead of practicing presence. And there is a world of difference between those two things. This is what I mean when I say sales is a practice. A practice is not something you master, and then move on from. A practice is something that deepens over time precisely because you never fully master it. Think about it. The greatest musicians in the world still practice scales. The greatest martial artists still practice basic forms. The greatest writers still struggle with sentences, not because they haven't learned, but because the learning never ends. Because every new level of skill reveals a new level of subtlety that was invisible before. Sales works exactly the same way. When you're brand new, the challenge is just getting the words out, just making the call, just walking into the room, just not freezing up when someone asks you a question you didn't expect. And that's real, that's legitimate, that's where everyone starts. But as you get better, the challenges change. They don't get easier, they get deeper. The challenge stops being about what to say and starts being about how to listen. It stops being about handling objections and starts being about understanding the fears behind the objections. It stops being about closing and starts being about creating an environment where the other person feels safe enough to say yes or safe enough to say no, because both of those outcomes serve them. And then if you keep going, if you stay with the practice long enough, the challenge goes even deeper still. It becomes about who you are, not what you know, not what you can do, but who you are when nobody is watching. Who you are when the deal falls through. Who you are when you've been rejected for the 5th time in a week. Who you are when someone you trusted breaks their promise. Who you are in the gap between where you are and where you want to be. That gap, by the way, is where most people quit. They look at the distance between their current reality and their vision, and they feel overwhelmed. They feel like they're failing. And because they only see the gap, they never see the ground they've already covered. They never see the progress. They never see the small victories, the subtle shifts, the moments where they handled something a little better than they would have 6 months ago. I used to do this all the time. I would look at what I hadn't achieved and completely ignore what I had achieved. I would focus on the deals I lost and forget about the relationships I'd built. I would fixate on the revenue I hadn't generated and overlook the skills I'd developed. And this constant focus on what was missing created a kind of chronic anxiety that made everything harder. It made selling harder. It made creating harder. It made living harder. And then one day I read something that stopped me in my tracks. I don't remember the exact source, but the idea was this: success is not built on a pile of failures. Success is built on a pile of small, consistent progress. And the way you build that pile is by learning to see it, by learning to recognize your own growth, by learning to say at the end of each day, I am further along than I was yesterday. Not because you're deluding yourself, not because you're ignoring your problems, but because attention is a choice, and what you choose to pay attention to shapes who you become. This changed everything for me. I started keeping track of my progress instead of my failures. I started celebrating small wins. I started noticing when I asked a better question in a meeting, or when I stayed calm during a difficult negotiation, or when I followed up with a client in a way that felt genuinely caring instead of transactional. And over time, this shift in attention didn't just make me feel better, it made me better. Because when you see your own growth, you start to trust it. And when you trust your own growth, you stop performing and start being present. And when you're present, everything changes. Here's what I've come to believe. The reason most people struggle with sales is not that they lack technique. There are 1,000 books on technique, 1,000 courses, 1,000 gurus who will teach you exactly what to say and when to say it. Technique is abundant. What's scarce is the inner work, the willingness to sit with discomfort, the willingness to be rejected and not take it personally, the willingness to care about someone else's outcome more than your own commission, the willingness to play a long game in a world that rewards short-term thinking. There's a concept in the Jewish intellectual tradition that I find deeply relevant here. The idea that study is not a means to an end. Study is the end. Learning is not something you do until you know enough. Learning is something you do because the act of learning itself is sacred. It is the process, not the destination, that gives life meaning. And I think sales, when approached with the right mindset, works the same way. The practice of selling, the daily discipline of showing up, listening, creating value, building relationships, refining your approach, deepening your understanding of human nature, this is not just a means to making money. This is a means to becoming a more complete person. Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not romanticizing struggle. I'm not saying sales should be painful. I'm not saying you should enjoy rejection or embrace poverty as some kind of spiritual practice. No, I believe in prosperity. I believe that when you create genuine value for people, financial reward follows. I believe that wealth, real wealth, is a reflection of real knowledge applied in the real world. If someone has knowledge but lives in constant scarcity, then something about their knowledge is incomplete. Either they don't know how to apply it, or they don't know how to communicate it, or they haven't yet learned how to connect their knowledge with the people who need it most. And that connection, that bridge between what you know and who needs to know it, that's sales. Let me say that again because it's important. Sales is the bridge between your knowledge and the people who need it. Without that bridge, your knowledge sits inside you, unused, unexpressed, uncreative. It doesn't matter how brilliant your ideas are if nobody ever hears them. It doesn't matter how skilled you are if nobody ever benefits from your skills. The act of selling is the act of taking what you have, what you know, what you've built, and putting it in front of the people whose lives it can improve. And that is not a lesser activity. That is not something to be ashamed of or apologetic about. That is one of the most generous things you can do. I think about this a lot because I come from a technical background. I'm a programmer. I build things. And in the world of technology, there's often this unspoken hierarchy where building is noble and selling is dirty. Where the engineer is the artist and the salesperson is the con man. And I bought into that for way too long. I spent years building things that nobody used because I was too proud or too scared or too confused to go out and sell them. I told myself I was being authentic. I told myself the work should speak for itself. I told myself that if I just built something good enough, people would find it. They didn't, because that's not how the world works. The world is noisy. The world is crowded. The world is full of people building good things that nobody ever hears about. And the difference between the things that change lives and the things that gather dust is almost never quality. It's almost always reach, it's distribution, it's communication, it's sales. So I had to make a choice. I could keep building in silence and feel righteous about my refusal to sell, or I could learn to sell and actually help people. And when I framed it that way, the choice was obvious. Because the refusal to sell wasn't noble, it was selfish. I was protecting my ego at the expense of the people I could serve, and that's the reframe that changed my life. Sales is not taking from people. Sales is giving to people. Sales is the act of saying, I have something that can help you, and I care enough about you to make sure you know about it. That's it. That's all it is. And when you approach it that way, everything shifts. The fear diminishes. The anxiety loosens. The awkwardness fades, because you're no longer trying to get something from someone. You're trying to give something to someone, and that is a fundamentally different energy. But here's the thing, you can't fake that energy. You can't pretend to care about someone's well-being while secretly calculating your commission. People feel that. They feel it in their gut. They might not be able to articulate it, but they know. They know when they're being served, and they know when they're being sold. And the only way to consistently show up with genuine care is to actually develop genuine care, which means doing the inner work, which means growing as a person, which means making sales a practice, not a performance. Let me talk about what this practice actually looks like day to day, because I think that's where most advice falls short. Most sales advice is about the big moments, the pitch, the close, the negotiation, but the practice of sales is mostly about the small moments, the moments nobody sees, the moments that don't make it into the highlight reel. It's the 5 minutes you spend researching a client before you reach out, not because you have to, but because you genuinely want to understand their world. It's the note you send after a meeting, not a template, not an automated follow-up, but a real note that references something specific they said, something that mattered to them. It's the way you handle a rejection, not with bitterness or self-pity, but with grace and curiosity. Thank you for your honesty. Can you help me understand what didn't resonate? It's the discipline of reviewing your conversations at the end of each day, not to beat yourself up, but to learn. What did I do well? What could I have done differently? Where did I truly listen, and where did I just wait for my turn to talk? This kind of daily reflection is, I believe, the engine of the entire practice, and it's something I've built my entire approach around. I actually developed an AI system specifically for this purpose, a tool that helps salespeople do exactly this kind of daily review. Not just surface-level stuff like, how many calls did I make, but deeper analysis. What were the emotional dynamics of the conversation? What was the client really saying beneath their words? Where were the moments of connection, and where were the moments of disconnection? What assumptions was I making, and were they accurate? I built this because I needed it for myself. Because I realized that the most important skill in sales isn't what happens during the conversation. It's what happens after the conversation. It's the reflection. It's the processing. It's the honest assessment of how you showed up and how you can show up better next time. And most salespeople never do this. They finish one call and immediately jump to the next. They finish one day and immediately start the next. There's no space for integration, no space for learning, no space for growth. And without that space, you don't get better. You just get busier. You accumulate experience without accumulating wisdom. You repeat the same patterns over and over and wonder why your results don't change. This is the trap that most salespeople fall into, and it's the trap that the practice of sales is designed to help you escape. Let me tell you about another moment that shaped my understanding of all this. I was on a call with a prospect, a business owner who was clearly stressed. You could hear it in his voice. He was distracted. He was short. He kept interrupting me, and the old me, the performing me, would have pushed harder, would have tried to redirect his attention, would have seen his distraction as an obstacle to overcome, but something in me had shifted by this point. Instead of pushing, I paused, and I said, "Hey, it sounds like you've got a lot on your plate right now. We don't have to do this today. I'm happy to reschedule if that would be better for you." There was this long silence on the line. And then he said, "You know what, yeah, I do have a lot going on. But honestly, the fact that you just said that, the fact that you're not trying to bulldoze me into a decision right now, that tells me more about you than anything in your pitch ever could. Let's keep talking." And we did keep talking, and he became a client. And more importantly, he became someone I genuinely cared about. I followed his business. I checked in on him. Not to upsell him, not to cross-sell him, but because I actually cared about how things were going. And that relationship, built on that one small moment of prioritizing his needs over my agenda, that relationship has been one of the most valuable in my professional life. This is what I mean by sales as a practice. It's not about perfecting a technique. It's about cultivating a way of being. It's about developing the kind of inner strength that allows you to let go of your need for a specific outcome and instead focus entirely on the person in front of you. And that inner strength, that ability to be present without attachment to results, that doesn't come from reading a book or attending a workshop. It comes from practice. Daily, consistent, unglamorous practice. There's a concept in psychology, I'm drawing here from the work on flow states and peak performance, that the best creative work happens not when you wait for inspiration, but when you show up consistently and let the work itself generate the inspiration. You don't wait to feel creative before you create. You create, and the feeling of creativity follows. The action precedes the emotion, not the other way around. Sales works exactly the same way. You don't wait to feel confident before you make the call. You make the call and the confidence follows. You don't wait to feel motivated before you do your outreach. You do your outreach and the motivation follows. You don't wait for the perfect moment to have the difficult conversation with a client. You have the conversation and the clarity follows. The practice is the thing. The practice generates everything else. And this is where most people get it backwards. They think they need to fix themselves before they can sell effectively. They think they need more confidence, more knowledge, more experience, more credentials, more something before they're ready. And so they wait, they prepare, they study, they plan. And they never start, or they start and stop. Start and stop. Always looking for the feeling, the readiness, the certainty that never comes. Here's what I've learned. Certainty never comes. Not before you start, maybe not even after you start. But what does come if you commit to the practice is something better than certainty. What comes is resilience. What comes is adaptability. What comes is the quiet knowledge that you can handle whatever happens because you've handled difficult things before and you'll handle them again. That knowledge doesn't make you fearless, it makes you brave. And bravery, unlike fearlessness, is something you can actually build. I want to shift gears a little and talk about something that I think is crucial for anyone who's thinking about sales as a lifelong practice, and that's the concept of who you're selling to and why it matters. Early in my journey, I made a mistake that a lot of people make. I tried to sell to everyone. I thought that casting the widest possible net was the smartest strategy. More people, more opportunities, more chances to close. Right, wrong. Dead wrong, because when you try to reach everyone, you end up reaching no one. Your message becomes diluted. Your positioning becomes unclear. Your energy gets scattered across too many directions, and nothing gains traction. There's a principle I hold close. Many focuses equal no focus. If you're doing too many things, chasing too many segments, trying to be too many things to too many people, you're actually working against yourself. You're creating the illusion of activity without generating real momentum. And in sales, momentum is everything. When I finally got honest with myself about this, I realized that my real value wasn't in serving the mass market. It wasn't in chasing individual consumers who were comparison shopping for the cheapest option. My real value was in working with businesses, with organizations, with leaders who understood the depth of what I was offering and were willing to invest in it because they could see the long-term return. This was a hard shift to make because the consumer market feels more accessible. It feels more democratic. It feels like where the action is, especially if you spend any time on social media. But the truth is, the consumer market rewards spectacle. It rewards emotion. It rewards the ability to capture attention in 3 seconds and hold it for 30. And that's not where my strengths lie. My strengths lie in depth. In nuance, in the kind of thinking that takes more than a headline to communicate. And trying to compress that depth into consumer-friendly content was like trying to fit an ocean into a teacup. It doesn't work, and you end up frustrated and wet. So I made the shift. I stopped trying to market myself to the masses and started positioning myself for the people who could actually appreciate and benefit from what I do. And the moment I did that, everything got easier. Not easy. Easier, because I was no longer fighting against my own nature. I was no longer trying to be someone I'm not. I was showing up as who I actually am in the places where that actually matters. And people responded. Not a million people, but the right people. And in business, the right people are worth infinitely more than a million wrong ones. This is a lesson that applies far beyond my specific situation. If you're a salesperson, or if you're anyone trying to build a career or a business in this era, you need to think very carefully about where you're placing yourself. Not every market deserves your energy. Not every platform deserves your time. Not every audience is equipped to understand your value. And that's not arrogance. That's clarity. That's strategy. That's the difference between spinning your wheels and gaining ground. And here's the deeper truth beneath all of this. The way you position yourself is a reflection of how you see yourself. If you position yourself in low-value markets, it's usually because you don't believe you belong in high-value ones. If you compete on price, it's usually because you don't trust people to pay for quality. If you chase volume instead of depth, it's usually because you're afraid that depth isn't enough. And all of those beliefs are lies. Useful lies, maybe, because they keep you safe, but lies nonetheless. And part of the lifelong practice of sales is identifying those lies and replacing them with truth. The truth is, your knowledge has value, your experience has value, your perspective has value. And there are people out there right now who need exactly what you have, not a watered-down version of it, not a discounted version, not a version that's been stripped of its complexity to fit into a 60-second video. The real thing. The full depth, the complete offering. Your job is not to make yourself smaller so more people can understand you. Your job is to find the people who are big enough to receive what you're offering. And that, by the way, is also sales. Finding the right people is sales. Qualifying prospects is sales. Saying no to the wrong opportunities so you can say yes to the right ones is sales. Walking away from a deal that doesn't serve your long-term vision is sales. Every one of those decisions is a selling decision, and every one of them requires the kind of discipline and clarity that can only come from sustained practice. Let me come back to the idea of practice for a moment, because I want to make sure I'm being concrete about what this means. When I say sales is a lifelong practice, I don't mean you should white-knuckle your way through endless cold calls for 40 years. That's not practice, that's punishment. Practice implies intentionality. Practice implies reflection. Practice implies a commitment to getting better, not just getting through. Here's what my practice looks like. Every single day, I engage with the work. Sometimes that means reaching out to potential clients. Sometimes that means creating content that communicates my ideas. Sometimes that means having a long conversation with someone in my network, not because I need something from them, but because I genuinely want to maintain the relationship. Sometimes it means sitting down with my AI system and reviewing a conversation I had, breaking it apart, analyzing it, looking for the moments where I was truly present and the moments where I drifted. And every single day, regardless of what specific activities I do, I commit to one thing. I commit to growth, not perfection, growth. I commit to being a little better today than I was yesterday, a little more attentive, a little more generous, a little more honest, a little more willing to sit with discomfort, a little more skilled at understanding what someone else needs before they even know they need it. This is the compound interest of personal development. It's not dramatic. Day to day, you can barely see it. But over months, over years, over a decade, it adds up to something extraordinary. It adds up to a person who can walk into any room, any conversation, any situation, and create value. Not because they have the best pitch, not because they have the best product, but because they have done the work of becoming someone worth doing business with, and that is something no AI can replace. Let me say that clearly because I think it's important in this moment we're living in. I work with AI every day. I build with AI. I use AI to enhance my thinking, to accelerate my analysis, to automate the parts of my work that don't require human judgment. AI is an incredible tool, but it is a tool. It amplifies what's already there. If what's already there is depth, integrity, and genuine human connection, then AI amplifies those things. If what's already there is shallow, manipulative, and transactional, then AI amplifies that instead. The practice of sales is about building the foundation that technology amplifies. It's about becoming the kind of person whose instincts are worth trusting, whose judgment is worth automating, whose relationships are too deep to be disrupted by the next wave of innovation. Because waves of innovation will keep coming. They always do. And the people who survive them, the people who thrive through them, are not the ones with the best tools, they're the ones with the strongest roots. I want to share one more story before I start wrapping this up, because I think it illustrates something essential about what it means to practice sales over a lifetime. A few months ago, I reconnected with someone I'd first spoken to almost 3 years earlier. We'd had a good initial conversation back then, but the timing wasn't right. They weren't ready. Their budget wasn't there. Their organization was going through changes, and so we parted ways amicably and I moved on, but I didn't forget about them. Every few months, I'd send them something, an article I thought they'd find interesting. A quick note checking in on how things were going, not a sales pitch, not a just circling back email, just a genuine expression of care. 3 years of that, 3 years of sporadic, no strings attached contact. And then one day, out of nowhere, they reached out to me. Their situation had changed. They were ready. They had budget. They had a specific problem they needed solved. And they came to me, not because I had the lowest price. Not because I had the flashiest marketing, but because over 3 years, I had demonstrated something that no pitch can communicate. I had demonstrated that I cared about them as a person, not just as a potential customer. That deal was one of the largest I've ever closed, but more important than the deal itself was what it taught me. It taught me that the longest game wins. It taught me that the relationships you invest in today will pay dividends in ways you can't predict. It taught me that patience is not the absence of action. Patience is the presence of faith. Faith that if you keep showing up, keep creating value, keep investing in people, the results will come. Maybe not today, maybe not this month, maybe not this year, but they will come. And that faith, that long-term orientation, that willingness to plant seeds you might not harvest for years, that is what separates a salesperson from a sales practitioner. A salesperson is focused on this quarter's numbers. A sales practitioner is focused on this decade's relationships. A salesperson asks, how do I close this deal? A sales practitioner asks, how do I become the kind of person that people want to do business with for the rest of their lives? These are fundamentally different questions, and they lead to fundamentally different lives. I think about this in the context of the broader world we're living in right now. We're in an era of unprecedented change. AI is reshaping every industry. Remote work is reshaping every organization. The traditional career path, the one where you get a job, climb the ladder, and retire with a pension, that path is disappearing. And in its place is something that's both terrifying and liberating, the need to sell yourself, not in a sleazy way, not in a self-promotional, look-at-me way, but in the deepest, most authentic sense of the word. You need to learn to communicate your value. You need to learn to build relationships that transcend any single job or project. You need to learn to create so much value for other people that opportunities come to you, rather than you chasing after them. And that's not just a nice idea, that's a survival skill. In a world where any job can be automated, where any company can restructure, where any industry can be disrupted overnight, the only truly safe position is the one where you are so good at creating value for others that people seek you out. Where your reputation precedes you, where your relationships protect you, where your skills are so deep and so adaptable that no single technological shift can make you irrelevant. Building that kind of position takes a lifetime. And the vehicle for building it is sales. Not sales as a department, not sales as a job title. Sales as a daily practice of showing up, creating value, communicating clearly, listening deeply, and investing in relationships that compound over time. I'll leave you with one thought that I come back to again and again. If you want to live a rich life, and I mean rich in every sense of the word, financially, intellectually, relationally, spiritually, then dedicate yourself to making other people's lives richer. That's not idealism, that's mechanics, that's how value creation works. You give first, you serve first, you invest first, and the returns follow. But here's the catch. You can't do it once and expect a reward. You can't do it for a week and then check your bank account. You have to do it consistently, patiently, faithfully, over a long period of time. You have to make it a practice. You have to make it a way of life. And when you do, something remarkable happens. The anxiety fades, not because your problems disappear, but because you stop being consumed by them. The fear softens, not because rejection stops hurting, but because you develop the resilience to absorb it and keep going. The confusion clears, not because the world becomes simple, but because your purpose becomes clear. Your purpose is to serve, your method is sales, and your timeline is the rest of your life. That's the practice, that's the path. And I'm on it right alongside you, learning every single day, getting it wrong sometimes, getting it a little more right other times, and committing to the long game because I believe, with everything I have, that the long game is the only game worth playing. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and if you'd like more conversations like this, make sure to follow along so you don't miss what's coming next.